Well, hello. It's a real pleasure to be able to tell you a little bit about the experience of being a scientist. My name is Neil Gow, and I am a scientist who spent most of my life working on an area of science that you may have heard absolutely nothing about, which is the study of fungi, which have got the ability to actually kill people. So I'm talking to you with the title, My Life with a Killer Fungus. Actually, though, I wanted to use this opportunity to also to give you a little bit of an idea of what life might actually be like if you chose to have a career as a scientist, because I really do think that it's not very well understood. But I've got a slide here of a lot of very famous scientists. Some you may recognize their faces. Probably everybody knows the face of Albert Einstein or David Attenborough. And some you may not know. There's Louis Pasteur there. And down in the bottom of the slide, sort of at bottom to the left, is somebody who is a scientist who I think is somebody we'll all know much more about in the future. Her name is Sarah Gilbert, and she's, I think, going to be a very famous scientist because she's the person who's developing the most promising vaccine, which is available at the moment, it's being developed at the moment, against COVID-19. Anyway, this is a lot of scientists, and I think in some ways, people think of scientists as being a bit quirky, sometimes a bit nerdy, and it's difficult to imagine what they actually do. Maybe not so much for people like David Attenborough, who you see all the time on TV, or Brian Cox you see in this picture as well, but most of it's quite difficult to imagine what life as a scientist must be like. So I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about what that's like, in case you're thinking about this, because I actually really believe that being a scientist is, in my view, the world's very best job. And let me tell you a little bit why I would claim that might be the case. Well, first of all, it's not badly paid. People who work in my lab, who are scientists working in my group, well, they're paid quite decently, more than 30,000 a year at current rates. And a few scientists are lucky enough to go on and develop their own little scientific company, and if they sell them, sometimes they can make a small fortune. Not all the time, but it's not a badly paid job. And people don't have any idea of whether it would be or would not be. And secondly, I think it's an extremely exciting job because you get to find out things that nobody's done before. I mean, quite literally, you're turning over a page of nature which has never been read before. And I think that's very few jobs that you actually do that. You can have a very, very international group of friends. So in my lab, one thing we often do just for fun is count out how many languages we could translate something into. And sometimes we can have as many as 25 different languages spoken within the group that we work with, reflecting how international the community of scientists really is. And the hours are very flexible. Sometimes you could have to work in the evening, but you could choose when you want to work because it often has to fit in with your experiments. You get to work with very talented people, that's for sure. Amazing people. And I think you're absolutely never bored with life as a scientist. Every day is something different. It's the complete opposite to a job where everything is very well defined and you go and do your job. Actually, every day as a scientist in a lab, you might be doing something different from yesterday. Also, you get to travel a lot. Let me just show you a little bit about that in my own context. I did this in preparation for this talk. I went back and thought through all the places where I've actually given talks and talked to people about my science. And there's a lot of places. These are all the places in and around Europe and around the world. I don't think there are many jobs where you have such an international experience as being a scientist. So it's really a very exciting job. I think another thing people often think is, well, you've got to be really brainy to be a scientist. Actually, I think that's not really the case. I think what you've got to be is genuinely interested. It really suits people who are curious about things, who want to discover things, who want to know a bit more about things. And usually that hits people and makes people very excited and catches their imagination once they start doing science. Actually, I discovered the other day my report card when I was at primary school. And there was no indication when I was 11 years old that I was going to have a career as a scientist. You can see here it is. I made a scan of it. And under nature knowledge, I'm a C+, rather disappointing. Well, that didn't stop me once I started finding out what I really enjoyed doing. And I went on to really enjoy my career thoroughly. A little bit about what actually it did for me. I went through school in Scotland. I was at Perth. I did some science topics there and decided I'd quite like to do biology at university. And I went, here's my brief CV. I was at Edinburgh as an undergraduate, and then I did a PhD at Aberdeen University. And then I went off to study in America for quite a brief period as a postdoc after I got my PhD. Very exciting time. I came back to Aberdeen where they offered me a lectureship, and I stayed there for quite a long time actually, and started off as a lecturer and became a professor eventually. And during that time, I also didn't just work in Aberdeen, I also went off and worked in other people's labs to keep my skills and interests going. I worked on sabbatical in Los Angeles. I was twice at MIT in Boston, which was terrific fun. And I also spent time in Iowa. And then after this, I moved to my current job to be Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Impact at the University of Exeter, which is a fantastic job. And the role of that job is to really to make sure that our research community has got all the advantages it can do, it's well organized, and to get the most out of the amazing work that they do at this brilliant university. And underneath that, I've just been a long list of people, and this is something I just wanted to point out. So these are people who all worked in my lab at some stage during my career, and now actually run their own labs. And they do this all over the place. You have to look in that, you'll find them in Mexico, in Thailand, in America, in Venezuela, in Europe, all throughout the UK. And they're sort of like my extended family. And it's fantastic because no matter where I go around the world, there's usually somebody I've worked very closely from. They've gone from working in my lab to being my friend. And we can go out and talk about science and have a beer and talk about their lives. Really a wonderful experience. And my life, you can see underneath that under research interests, is something which you might think, what on earth would somebody study fungi for? And I've spent my whole life studying fungi, particularly about diseases caused by fungi, which is why my talk is called Killer Fungus. And I'm interested in how the diseases are caused and what we can do to stop them. And I've really had a wonderful time studying this at multiple levels, most recently looking at fungi which are resistant to infections and cause tremendous problems. And if you have not heard about that, well, don't worry. Actually, surprisingly, not many people have. But I think they should do. And I'll try and explain in a minute why I think that should be the case. Now, this is the point I wanted to make here is, you know, when you go and you're doing a GCSE or you're doing an A-level or in biology, you get a brief taste of lots of things, but it's very difficult to imagine what a scientist might do who studies one of those things. And probably none of you have thought, gosh, you know, I could study a fungus. I mean, why on earth would you think that'd be an interesting thing to study? It might seem like rather a daft thing to study, but actually, as I'll try to explain to you, it turns out to be really very, very interesting. So, and I'm aware, and you know, it's when I go to my friends for dinner or my family or my sisters, and they don't automatically want to talk about fungi, I can tell you. Often fungi have got a kind of peculiar reputation. They're, people know a bit about mushrooms and things, but they really don't know much about fungi, which might actually threaten your life. And you really have to explain why it's worth, the taxpayer actually paying for your salary at times. And in fact, this really came to me when I studied, was watching a film which is very popular in my family. You may have seen, it's quite an old film now, which is the film Ghostbusters. And I'm going to play you a little clip from Ghostbusters, where a scientist, and in this case, they're trying to establish the scientist in this team is really an incredibly nerdy guy. And they have a little clip to try and demonstrate how nerdy he really is. And I'm just going to play that for you, and it'll let you see how I thought how hurtful this little bit of Hollywood script writing really was. So I'll play this clip now.
Do you have any hobbies?
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
Hope you heard that. Do you have any hobbies? I collect spores, molds, and fungus, which is presumably what a scriptwriter thought must be about the worst thing that scientists could probably do. And I don't quite collect spores, molds, and fungus, but I certainly do work on spores, molds, and fungi. And I have to kind of explain why that'd be worthwhile doing. And in my world, the fungi that I'm working with are fungi that I really want to get rid of. But actually, I need to make it clear to you that that isn't always the case. And fungi are really very important organisms in general. So that's what I was going to start off now. Tell you a bit about the area that I work in. And this is probably something which is barely touched on in anything you've done in your biology lessons, but actually it's extremely interesting. So I am essentially a mycologist, and mycology study is the study of fungi. And this is the type of fungi that most people know about, fungi you might see in the wood. And if you look carefully, there is an amazing number of fungi around. And in fact, if you look at life on Earth, and you've probably followed David Attenborough's programs from time to time, which are amazing programs, certainly inspired me, because David Attenborough's career goes right back to the time when I was thinking about going to university to study something. You'll find that most of David Attenborough's programs are focused on animals and plants. And we estimate there's about 400,000 different types of plants on the planet Earth. There's about 1 to 7 million, quite a vague number because we really don't know how many insects there are. Just so many different species of insects, and they really dominate the diversity of types of animals that exist. But in fungi, we know even less. And the estimates of how many different types of fungi there are very, very crude. There's probably at least 5 million, we think now. And of those, we've probably only described about a fifth of those or much less. So that means in some parts of the world, if you find five fungi in the forest, only one of them will have been described before. It's an amazing kingdom in terms of its biodiversity. We don't know very much about them. And there's every reason that we should do. So this is a book that I was involved in editing about the fungal kingdom. And I just wanted to show you a few pictures about fungi, just to make the point that, first of all, they're really beautiful organisms. And remember just how many there are. So this is Aurelia, which looks like an ear. And here's a puffball. You may have seen those. Some of the fungi are luminescent. And this gruesome one is called dead man's fingers. And you can see them look as though they're like fingers coming out of the ground. And here's some bird's nest fungi and some other cup-like fungi in lawyer's wig with these drops of ink, and bracket fungi. And here's some very beautiful fungi, chanterelles, which are very common around here, part of the world. Very easy, very nice to eat. And here's the most famous one, which is an agaricus, which is the mushroom that you see little gnomes sitting on top of. And here's some ball-like fungi. So you can see there's a huge diversity of so-called macrofungi, which form these fruiting bodies. And here's some turkey tails, indigo fungi, and various brackets. I think they're really rather amazing in how many different types there are and how beautiful they really look. And then don't eat them if you don't know what you're dealing with, because quite commonly in the woods around here, you can find things which would not do you any good at all if you ate them. So the death cap, destroying angel, and here are some other ones, including the Amanita muscaria, the common toadstool. You wouldn't want to eat that. It's got hallucinogenic effects. And these ones at the top are actually deadly. And this one makes you feel extremely ill, Coprinopsis. So although you can eat some fungi in the woods, you better know your mycology before you risk doing anything about that. And I'd advise you not to do it unless you're absolutely sure what you're looking at. Now, the fungi in the woods are quite remarkable. Here's a fungus I just wanted to make a point of. This is an aerial map of Exeter. And I'm now going to show you on the scale of Exeter a colony of a fungus called Armillaria. And here's the pictures of it on the left-hand side. It's got this orangey yellow fruit body. It's called the honey fungus. It's edible. And it's also called the bootlace fungus because in the ground you can find these root-like structures which resemble bootlaces. And if you were to see a single colony, which have been described in some of the woods of the United States, this sort of size, they're enormous. The diameters of those colonies would be so big that they would be on the scale of small towns. And Armillaria has got the honor of being in the Guinness Book of Records for the oldest and largest living organism. It's an organism which we know that in certain forests, they've been around for more 2,000 years, and a single colony can occupy 2,200 hectares and can actually be collectively, all the bits of fungus weighed together would exceed the weight of a blue whale. And this isn't a lot of different colonies joined together. This is a single colony. We know that we can do genetic fingerprinting to prove that. So some of these organisms, although they're studied by people like me, microbiologists studying microscopic things, some of them are absolutely huge from the macroscopic world. But down the microscope, they're singularly also very beautiful. This is a deadly fungus called Aspergillus, and these are the sporing bodies that they form under the microscope. And here's some other fungi that I've studied over the years, which also caused untold ravaging and harm in the human population, as I'll explain later on. Some of them look like little blobs like this. They're little yeast-like cells. Some of them produce spores like this, and some have got big gelatinous capsules. But actually, I think you might agree that when you look at them down the microscope, some of them have got great symmetry and great structure and really look very pretty. And I mentioned the diversity, and that means that you can always find something quite extraordinary. So just a couple of slides to illustrate this. This is a pond called Reed Pond. It's actually in Exeter University's grounds. And one day, one of our colleagues at Exeter literally took a cup of this and started to use DNA sequencing to find out what was in all of the DNA and all the organisms in a cup of water from this pond. And he discovered these things called the cryptomycota. And that's a tree of life which had never been found before. And what's the amazing thing about the cryptomycota, although they were only discovered in 2011, they actually turn out to be more diverse than the living land plants. So you can imagine here Tom Richards going back home, and his wife might say to him, "What did you do today, Tom?" He said, "I discovered a very interesting group of organisms, somewhat bigger than the plants." And we discovered this as late as 2011. And I think this is quite remarkable, showing you just how much mystery there still is left in the field of mycology. So many things yet to be discovered. Now, the other thing about fungi is, although obviously in Ghostbusters they were very rude about the possibility of studying fungi, I can assure you that you probably have eaten or used a fungal product every day of your life. Some of them you might know that these are fungal products. For example, we know that bread is risen with yeast, and we know that alcoholic products are the fermentation products of yeast. And we know we're eating mushrooms, and we know that you might know that some other things like the blue cheeses are ripened with fungi. Corn, a lot of people think is a vegetable product, but it's actually a filamentous fungus called Fusarium. And there are many products which are very useful products in terms of medicine. So penicillin is produced by fungi, and there are many other products which are used in life-saving medical treatments, which are generated by fungi. And then there's some surprising products. I bet you didn't realize that wine gums, the sort of acidic flavor of wine gums, come from citric acid, which is a product produced by fungi. And that cheese and onion crisps don't have any cheese and onion in them. They are actually flavored with yeast extract, which gives them that particular taste. So you use a product of fungi every day. They're incredibly useful organisms. And in terms of truffles, they're also the most valuable food products. And there was once a single £2 truffle which sold for more than $300,000. Amazing. And this is a list of a lot of people who've all got Nobel Prizes for studying fungi. You might have heard of one or two of them. Alexander Fleming, for example, who discovered penicillin. But the finding that genes were related to the production of enzymes came from studying of a fungus called Neurospora. Studies on cell division and cancer were done in studying yeast, and many other fundamental aspects about life came from studying fungal systems. And I've got a picture here of this person, Paul Nurse, who I know quite well. And Paul Nurse got the Nobel Prize along with his two other colleagues. Here's a plaque of the Living Systems Institute at Exeter, which was opened by Paul Nurse. And Paul Nurse got his Nobel Prize for the study of cancer. But actually, Paul never studied cancer at all. What he did was studied a yeast called the fission yeast. And the fission yeast, he showed, had a cell cycle which was so similar to human cells that you could switch genes in and out of human cells and put them into yeast, or put yeast cell cycle genes into human cells, and they could grow just fine. And that showed you that the process of cell division was conserved fundamentally across all kingdoms of life. And he also showed that when it goes awry and you can't stop cell division from taking place, that is the process called cancer. And here's a little picture of me giving a medal from the British Mycological Society to Paul Nurse for his work studying fungi, which led to his Nobel Prize. All right, so now I just want to reflect a little bit about my own interests in killer fungi. And although I've just explained to you that fungi are amazing, they provide very useful products, they've taught us all things about life, some of them, without any doubt, are major problems for us and cause all sorts of unwanted diseases. Now, I'm going to discuss in particular the diseases of humans, but I should start by telling you about some other types of diseases. And I haven't really worked for a long time on diseases of plants, but I need to tell you that the major diseases of plants are caused by fungi. And in fact, of all the crops that we try and grow for food, 70 to 80% of them are destroyed by fungi, even when we try to prevent that from happening. And that represents about $10 billion lost a year, even after we try and prevent fungi from causing disease using fungicides. And that is enough to feed about 600 to 4 million people a year. So it's a massive loss of the potential to feed people, and also represents, in terms of the diseases of trees, a massive loss of capacity to fix carbon and therefore to prevent global warming. And talking of global warming, the trouble is with fungal diseases of plants is as the planet's warming up, we're finding that diseases which used to be restricted to only the equatorial regions of the world, the very hot regions of the world, are marching forward. And we can actually determine the speed of that, and this has been done by my colleague Sarah Gurr at Exeter, that about 8 kilometers a year, they're marching towards the poles and increasing the numbers of countries which are affected by these terrible diseases. So fungi affect plants, but they also affect animals. And I'm going to start by telling you about a particular type of animal which was wiped out entirely by the fungi, and that is the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs, you say? We know that the dinosaurs died out about 60 odd million years ago, but I'm sure many of you will know what is supposed to be the reason why they all died out, and that was because of an asteroid hitting the planet. And this is what is in the textbooks and on the TV as being the reason why the dinosaurs passed away and were replaced by other groups of organisms and animals. But you may ask yourself, well, actually, what happened? Well, we know that the collision of the asteroid happened on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And of course, that would have destroyed all the animals locally. But why did they die around the whole world? And the reason for that is thought because after this happened, the dust from the crater which was formed went into the atmosphere. And for many years following that, there was essentially a nuclear winter where the sun was blotted out. And what happened after the sun was blotted out was that the plants died because they were unable to photosynthesize, and masses of plants then died and were composted by fungi, and huge numbers of spores went into the atmosphere. And one thing about dinosaurs, typical of the reptiles, is they do not deal well with fungal infections, particularly when they're cold. And this is thought to have led to the elimination of the dinosaurs, but survival of species with warm blood, such as mammals and birds, which are very warm-blooded creatures. So actually, the death of the dinosaurs is probably traced back to the composting of the dead plants following the collision of this asteroid on the planet. So many animals in the past have been affected and continue to be affected by the growth of fungi. And we are no different. Humans are also affected by fungi. And you may know something about this, but I bet you don't know much about those killer species that we study in Exeter. And these are not mushrooms that look like this. This was a beautiful picture that was painted by somebody after we had an exhibition in London about the killer fungi. And we had a lot of press clippings about that, trying to raise awareness about the importance about fungi which you experience and could they be affecting your health. And what we were trying to do here is to make the point that actually fungi are much more dangerous organisms that people realize, and actually we need to do a lot more to support scientists to study fungal diseases. In fact, there are very few people who study fungal diseases, and the biggest center in Europe happens now to be in Exeter. So just to give you some of the numbers, so the most common infection of humans is actually skin infections, and it's estimated that at least a quarter of the world's population have skin infections. Over 100 million women get recurrent mucosal infections. More than 10 million people suffer from fungal allergies, and more than 1 million deaths, probably closer to 1.5 million deaths every year are due to fungal infections. And to put that in context, that's more than malaria. And although it's a very different type of disease, the coronavirus, COVID-19, that number of 1.4 million is way more than those who have been killed by the COVID-19 outbreak so far. Of course, fungi are not as highly contagious as COVID-19, so I'm not claiming they're very similar in this sense. But I think we have to keep in mind that last year, the year before, and next year, there are likely to be as many people die of fungal infections than well-known diseases like malaria or tuberculosis or HIV. And this is actually more than the number of people who die from breast cancer or prostate cancer, and all being studied by a relatively small community of people. And here are some pictures of the diseases, and here are the main big four organisms which we have to study to understand these diseases. And my favorite one, the one I'm the specialist is the study of Candida. And we do this at Exeter in our medical research council-funded facility, the Centre for Medical Mycology, which I said is the largest single centre studying diseases of humans caused by fungi in Europe at the moment. And here's the organism that I study, Candida albicans. It's a very interesting fungus. Its biology is very complex. It's all these different types of cells, some round cells, some filamentous cells. They grow in different parts of the body. and they can cause disease not just on the surfaces of our cells, but actually throughout the different parts of the human body. And most people who have Candida are perfectly fine. And I predict that those who are listening to my talk, probably about a quarter of you have got Candida in your body, and it caused you no harm whatsoever. The problem is sometimes when you're ill and your immune system is very weak, then the fungus is ready to start to take advantage of that and cause a problem in that setting. So Candida is a disease of the diseased. And it costs a lot of money to protect vulnerable people, such as cancer patients, for example, from the potential infections caused by Candida. So that's what I study. It's a very interesting fungus. And yet again, when you look at it growing on plates like here, lots of variability in the fungus, as you can see here. This is just one strain of the fungus with different colony types. Fascinating organism, looks quite benign. Most of the time it is. It also can cause tremendous problems. So we're trying to do a lot to increase the public awareness of this. If you go onto the App Store, and you can download some computer games that we generated to help make people think about fungal diseases. And one of these ones in Fungal Invaders, you can try and use a syringe to kill different types of fungi, and this will teach you about drug resistance. And the other one is much more fun in a way, called Killer Fungus Evolution. You get to be a fungus and you try to kill your human host by picking up things to avoid being detected by the immune system, which really is a game that teaches you quite a lot about how actually fungi do that exact process. So that's the end of what I wanted to say. I'm showing you at an end a picture of the team of people at a Christmas time, so everybody in their best party duds here of our research group. And here are some of the people who have worked with me, which I want to thank. I've had a fabulous career working with the people who are in my lab and my immediate collaborators, and those that I've worked with around the world. And I just want to end by reminding you, so life as a scientist is perhaps not what you think about. And it might not be what you've learned about either. You might find yourself, if you want to be a scientist, studying something you never really even gave 2 seconds thought to when you were doing GCSE or an A-level. But remember, always something new, something that might make a real difference. It might be a real help to people around the world. Not badly paid, very international, a very social job if you like working with other people, and suiting people who've got an inquisitive nature. And I'm sure many of you are exactly that type of person. And I'm going to end with a slide, which is a bit of a doctored slide really, but it's a real picture of my fungus, Candida, saying goodbye to you in its own special way. And at the end of that, I will finish my brief talk, and then I'll look forward to join you later on in the day, and I'll have a chance to speak to you and address any questions that you might have. And I'm really looking forward to the chance to speaking to a number of you later on. So thank you very much for listening to this brief presentation.